Hello guys, welcome to the fiction series. Today we are gonna see, what if Naruto got harem with Daenerys, Cersei and Elia? Part 1. If you want more awesome fan fiction like this, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, so without wasting any time let's get into the video. Some say Tywin Lannister does not felt fear. Perhaps that was true. Perhaps not. Who can say? As Lord Paramount of the Westerlands, head of House Lannister, Lord of Casterly Rock and Warden of the West, Lord Tywin was certainly made of sterner stuff than the average Westerosi noble. He had taken a house once known for its weakness and made it strong once again. Not through generosity or honor or foolish kindness, but through ruthless pragmatism. He was, after all, the head of his house. Naturally, the head of the house must stand strong, lest they appear weak. It's the family name that lives on. It's all that lives on. Not personal glory or honor, but family. His father had been weak in matters of the realm, he would not be. Those who had come to think of the Lannisters as weak were swiftly disproved of such notions. If a debt were owed to him, one must repay it. If one did not, well. Just ask the Rains and Tarbecks. If any were yet living, they would loudly attest to his intensity. The bards had even compassed a quaint song of the massacre. A tragic but necessary step in furthering the foundation of their house while eradicating those who would oppose them. The Lannister name would remain long after he returned to the dirt, the legacy left behind by him, his children, and his children's children. At present he had little hope for Jaime or Cersei. Far too interested in preening than statecraft or the business of Casterly Rock. Perhaps that wasn't fair him, they were only children after all. But neither had proven themselves overmuch in the last 9 months. Thus, it was here with his third child that his hopes lay. Hope and all the soul-crushing fear that came with it. Yes, Tywin Lannister knew what fear was. He understood it. Respected it. Push. He knew that fear now, felt it coil in his gut like a hideous serpent threatening to strangle him as he watched his lady wife writhe on her birthing bed. Each cry ripped through Casterly Rock, a knife through his heart, every gasp a painful blow to his soul. And there was nothing he could do for her. For all his might and wealth, Tywin was as powerless as any other man in this, weak as any other. He could only stand by and hold her hand while she swore and spit and snarled. Joanna, the light of his life, the one woman in this world that he would yield to, his everything. Without her his life would be rudderless, his heart hardened. She was every bit a lioness of the Lannisters, it was not pain that made her weep but concern for the babe in her belly. He's coming, beloved. The frantic desperation in her voice unmanned him. I can feel him. For all his wit, Tywin found himself struck speechless by her ferocity. He saw the strain etched into her face, the pain as that old doddering fool of a Maester coaxed her through her contractions. Yet for all her suffering Joanna had adamantly refused milk of the poppy or any such medicine, though she bled and bore her suffering with a tenacity few possessed, though she gritting her teeth as her body worked tirelessly to usher this tiny new soul into the world. He couldn't help but fear for her. Golden hair hanging like a wreath about her pale, sweaty face, her crimson dress hiked up to the knees. The child was nearly here, or so she claimed. He was inclined to believe her. Odds. So much blood. A man's past can haunt him, the smallest of actions often have the most lasting of consequences. Cersei and Jaime had been a hard birth for her. This was harder still. For all the blood and battle he'd seen, the sight of a child being born his child still unnerved him. Yet he couldn't bear to tear himself from his wife's side, even as her grip promised to crush every bone in his right hand. He grimaced against it and willed himself not to dwell on dark thoughts, but pleasant ones. At least Ares in a rare moment of sanity hadn't object to Pycelle's presence for Joanna's labor. With him here at Casterly Rock, she might yet survive. Or she might die. A sharpened and sudden squall arose all at once, startling husband and wife alike. It's a boy, my lord. For all his age, Pycelle proved his worth and loyalty 10 times over. In less than a minute, he'd severed the umbilical cord and wrapped the wailing babe in clean linen. Then his bearded face turned down and pensive for some reason as he gazed at the child's face, for reasons Tywin didn't understand. The boy looked healthy. He certainly sounded healthy enough by his cries. No, he decided, he didn't like the look the Grandmaster was giving him. As if he were a freak of some sort. An abomination. Nothing could be further from the truth. He was not a dwarf, and Tywin saw no extra fingers or toes. He was, for all intensive purposes, just a boy. Red orbs. No doubt the Maester meant the words for himself, but Tywin's keen hearing caught it immediately. An ill omen. What are you on about? But Joanna was already rising, reaching for the newborn with the single-minded intensity that so defined her as a mother, and he never had his answer. Concern for his wife won out over suspicion, and he released her hand to place a steadying hand against her back. She swatted it aside and propped herself up on her elbows of her own accord, drawing a chagrined smile from the lion. Let me see him, Pycelle. It began as a groan, but with every syllable she grew stronger. Let me see my son. "Aye, if it would please my lady," the Grand Master doddered, "perhaps a wet nurse would be." His wife would have none of it. "Give him to me." Before such devotion even the master faltered and the boy was soon within her arms, mewling softly. "Look at him, Tuin." She crooned, beckoned. "Look at your son." The Lord of Casterly Rock did just that. Bright blue eyes squinted up at him. None of this red orbs nonsense Picel had been on about. Perhaps old age was catching up to the Grand Master. Regardless, he had served his purpose and helped to bring him into the world unharmed. So it was, then. A night of passion so many moons ago had given birth to a son. The birthing had been rough, but Joanna had survived somehow. Even now he watched her clutch the child close, cooing softly at him as only a mother could. In moments the boy was nursing, sucking lustily against her breast. She would live, Picel assured him. If she hadn't he shuddered at the thought. Without his wife, no. Tuin's mind rebelled with a violent shudder and refused to even consider it. He was fond of his children, inasmuch as man like him could be fond of them, but his cold heart had only ever truly warmed for Joanna. Seeking to distract himself, the lion dismissed Picel with an errant wave. "Thank you for your service. Leave us." The master glanced at him. "But my lord, this is an ill omen." "Did I stutter?" A growl etched itself into his voice. "Out." But the sputter that wasn't entirely feigned this time, the Grand Master tottered toward the door. But his gaze lingered, drawn once more to the boy's face. Why? What was it about his son that perturbed him so? Tuin resolved to ask him at a later date, but now was not the time for such thoughts. No sooner had the door shut than he turned his attention back to the boy. "I suppose we need to think of a name," he murmured. "I've already thought of one," Joanna hummed, rocking the babe softly. The golden brow rose in mild consternation and surprise both. "Have you now? Without telling me?" So she told him her choice gladly, and he knew at once that there would be no swaying her. Of course, he still tried anyway. "You can't be serious." He nearly guffawed outright at the news. "With a name like that he'll be a laughingstock. Tell me you're joking." "I've never been more serious about anything in my life, my beloved." Joanna's cheek nuzzled against that of their son's with tender care, cradling him as though he might shatter into glass at any moment. "I saw him in a dream, Tuin. He spoke to me, told me his name. He'll do great things someday." The conviction in her voice unnerved the lion, shook his resolve. A dream? Nonsense. Perhaps she was still out of sorts from the birthing. How could a boy who'd only just been born tell his mother what he wanted to be named? It was the stuff of snarks and grumpkins, and he believed none of it. What manner of magic was that? Nonsense, utter nonsense. But for the sake of her pride, he leashed his retort, if only just. Did he now? Tuin rolled his eyes. "I suppose he read your palm as well." "Careful, dear." His wife clicked her tongue at him playfully, her free spirit already beginning to recover in the absence of Picel. "I may be weak at the moment, but I'll repay every bit of your snark." In the end the choice was taken from Tuin, and Joanna, as was often her wont, named their son after the dream she'd had. In his darker moments he would look back at this momentous day and dwell at it, somewhat ruefully in the days to come. An unorthodox name perhaps, and not necessarily the one he'd intended to give the boy at first, but it would do. He sounded it out now, testing the newfound name on his lips as he gazed down at the infant swaddled in cloth, considering him, his odd blue eyes, that faint golden wisp of hair, those peculiar cheeks. "Naruto, is it?" And the boy smiled. He would change the world. Joanna Lannister loved her children. Every true mother treasured their children. More than life itself. Any woman who cared not a whit for their offspring was no matriarch in her eyes, but a wench and a craven, something to be reviled and spit upon. A parent had a duty to those that came after them, and a mother's duty was to her children. Always her children. They were Joanna's light, her life, her everything. Second only to her husband himself, and only then because she'd grown up with Tuin as a little girl. She would live for them, fight for them, die for them if she must. Never before had. But her children. As such, she adored the twins just as much as she did the babe in her arms. Stubborn Jamie, still struggling with his letters and only just now learning to hold a sword, yet wide-eyed with wonder when he saw the bundle in her eyes. Sullen Cersei, petulant at no longer being the center of her mother's world, yet curious about her new brother all the same. "Blue eyes," he murmured, "that's new." "What of it?" Cersei gave a sulk, heedless of the look it garnered her. "They might yet change." Joanna offered Jamie an indulgent smile. "Would you like to hold him, then?" Jamie jolted, but shook his head fiercely. "But I might drop him." "Don't be such a coward." Of course, Cersei wasn't going to take that lying down. Anything Jamie couldn't or wouldn't do was something she absolutely had to. She wanted to be the center of attention, and if that meant holding this burbling infant, then so be it. Naturally, Joanna had anticipated this, and as such when Cersei pushed her brother out of the way, she offered little Naruto to her gladly. It was a good thing for her to take an interest in her brother after all, and she would gladly give the twins the nudge they needed to accept their sibling. They were family. Family looked after one another. Careful, now. She instructed as young Cersei cradled the infant in her arms, watch his head. I have him, mother. Cersei tossed her head. I don't see what all the fuss is about. Then the babe reached up and did the unthinkable. Her daughter blinked. Once. Twice. Finally, she dared a small smile. He is rather cute, I suppose. She mumbled weakly. For a babe. Jamie crowded in at her elbow. Quite the grip he's got. Joanna would forever vividly recall her first memory of them interacting with one another, of watching, spellbound as the babe clutched at Cersei's outstretched finger and cooed softly. That drew a rare smile from her daughter, and she even unbent enough to deign a giggle. In that moment their eyes there was no distinction to be made between the three of them. They were her children. She would love them until the end of her days and beyond. Any child that came after this one would be just as loved. So she swore. By the old gods and the new. Tywin kept insisting they name him Nathaniel at least. Naruto was too foreign a name for a Lannister, he said. It won't command respect, he said. Eventually she yielded, if only in part. Let this rotten world call him what they willed. If her beloved was so keen on calling him that, then so be it. Joanna had sworn she would always call him by the name she'd given him. It just felt right somehow. When the Mesters had tried to take him from her she'd refused then, just as she refused them now. She no longer trust them. But she trust family. Jaime and Cersei they'd look after him. Even after she was gone. She couldn't be there for him forever. But his siblings, Cersei and Jaime and any future children Joanna herself had would be there for him. Naruto. Yes, it was just as she'd said before. One day, she knew this boy would change the world. His little brother was a vicious fighter. Jaime Lannister realized this terrible truth relatively late in his childhood, and that was his mistake. By the time he understood what Nathaniel Naruto truly was, the boy had nearly become his equal in the art of the blade. Oh yes, his baby brother was good. Very good. Better than good even, he had the potential to be something extraordinary and dangerous. The great ones always were. Some were born with a silver spoon in their mouths. Others were good at fighting. Steel sang in a clenched fist hand, and daggers danced in another, a deadly dervish of death, in which Jaime found himself the center of. Sparks flew through the air as their weapons collided. Once. Twice. Thrice, now. Parry. Riposte. Thrust. He could scarcely deflect, much less evade those nasty little knives. Nathaniel drove at him again and again and again, keeping him on the back foot, forcing him to a corner. They were using live steel today, and he almost found himself regretting it, if only because his dear sibling wasn't afraid to take a few nicks to face for a win. He'd done it before. Ladies like scars. Naruto would have more than a few by the time he reached adulthood. Last, but those daggers were quick. He shunted one aside, hissed as his brother cut his shoulder beneath his tunic and lashed out, delivering a brutal right hook in rebuttal. Naruto took it with a grunt, stepped back, wiped a thin line of blood from his lip, and grinned. Then he came at him again. Bloody relentless. Jaime considered himself no slouch with the sword. He was skilled himself, but swordsmanship was where his martial talents both began and ended. His baby brother didn't just train with the sword, no, you see, Nathaniel was the second son. The spare, not the heir, given nothing he couldn't grasp for himself. And so he trained with whatever he could get his grubby little mitts on. Yesterday, it had been an awful axe. Today, it was those damnable dancing daggers. Tomorrow he suspected it would be a spear, one of Dornish make. Cersei had seen him drilling with it. The fist slammed into his side, shattering his thoughts and rattling his ribs through the armor he wore. Pay attention, brother. He sighed. I am Nathaniel. His sibling scowled. Don't like being called that. It's just a name. Your name, he tutted back with a grin easy burden to bear. Ow. Nathaniel must have took issue with it because he crashed into him like a falling star. A knee surged up into his groin, rendering the world white and doubling him over. A hammerfist rang his blade like a bell. In came the daggers again as he staggered. Jaime tried to parry, only to see the feint too late. His beloved brother reversed course at the last instant and gave his face an open-palmed smack in return for that right hook he'd taken earlier. Jaime recoiled with a hiss. Odds you're a sharp little thing. He muttered, rubbing his aching cheek, daggers in the dark won't get you everywhere, brother. I disagree. Naruto grinned slid them up his sleeves, eliciting a brief lull in their little duel. They've gotten me precisely where I want to be. As for you. He was still speaking when he whirled. A boot swept Jaime's legs and knocked him to the ground. He landed hard on his back. The moment he did it, Naruto jumped him. Twin daggers crossed over his throat. Time to yield, bit brother. Another loss to his little brother. How going? I give. Nathaniel Naruto. grinned down at him, hopped off his chest, and offered his hand. Jamie clasped it with his right and let himself be hauled upright. Stronger than he looked, this little brother of his. He stood a good head taller than him, yet his sibling hoisted him to his feet with ease. There were times when he worried about his brother. Naruto was more than he appeared, most of Casterly Rock knew that, but it was tiny, subtle displays like this that truly concerned him. He didn't make any secret of his strength and speed, nor his healing touch, not these days. Second son though he might be, he couldn't help but wonder what his little brother would be like when he was older. Naruto touched a hand to his forehead and grimaced. Jamie saw it and guided him down to a stone bench. Headaches again? A little. He clicked his tongue in mild irritation. Feels almost familiar. Jamie turned a keen eye turned on him. Don't go mad on me now. Whatever would I do without you? The blonde brow quirked. Live a better life. Don't say such things. HRMPH. His brother grunted. Enough about me. You need to pay attention in a fight. See? Naruto tapped a dagger to his wrist. That's you disarmed. Literally. What would you do if you lost this hand? I expect I'd have to learn to use my left. An elbow ribbed him good and proper. You're shit with your left. Honest to a fault. A wry chuckle escaped him. You really don't fight with honor, do you? Honor doesn't win wars. It gets men killed. Victory is all that matters. The faint sound of clapping filled the yard. Well said. Jamie whirled and Naruto with him. Much to his surprise, he found their lord father waiting for them. He looked pleased, almost grimly so, and it was that expression that set off all manner of bells in Jamie's head. When did you arrive? Just this morning. Father approached them, hands clasped before him. Your mother's due to give birth any day now. Did you think I would miss it? He had thought so, yes. The king was increasingly erratic these days. Father was seldom the sort to smile when he returned from the capital, but he did sometimes. Jamie had learned to savor those rare moments. Tywin Lannister almost looked human when he smiled. Almost. Theirs was a powerful house, but they did not rule, no, that right fell to the dragons, the Targaryens, and a king who may or may not be mad. Just as well. Jamie had no interest in the Iron Throne. He knew well the rules of succession. Casterly Rock would be his one day. Cersei would likely marry Rhaegar, and Nathaniel well. Father would doubtlessly try to throw him at some crazed Targaryen wench down the line, or maybe some other highborn lady whenever one came of age. His brother had complained rather loudly about that. He looked fit to complain again right now, given the letter father was now dangling before him. Jamie squinted at it. Curious. He recognized that seal. Didn't it come from? This came from the capital. Father answered for him. For you. Nathaniel perked up and reached for it. Tywin tugged it out of his reach. I thought we had quashed this folly of yours by now, Nathaniel. You play a dangerous game. Jamie perked up. Girl. Father had taken him to King's Landing a fortnight past. Had his little brother met someone? Who, then? It didn't make a lick of sense. The only family of any real import in the capital were the Targaryens and… Odds be good. Surely his little brother wasn't that foolish. How would you know? Naruto adopted a rather mulish expression. If you just give her a chance you'd see she's suffering. You're my son. Twin spoke over him, appearing to loom larger every moment. A Lannister. When you marry it will be for the benefit of this family, not yourself, and certainly not for a foolish scheme such as this. He spun on one heel, eyed a nearby brazier, then flung the tiny scroll into it, heedless of the outraged noise Naruto made. You will cease this foolish pursuit and we will speak no more of this. His eyes could have made a Northman shiver in that instant. Do you understand? Father, Jamie forced himself to rally. He had to know. Who was that letter from? It matters not. He said at length. Family is everything and I will not allow either of you to drag our name through the mud. Naruto scoffed at him. With a family like this, who needs enemies? Careful now, boy. I enjoy your wit, but you tread on thin ice. Naruto lifted his chin to stare father down. Oh, dear. Jamie knew that look and it was nothing good. This could only end poorly. A distant scream pierced the tension. Cersei came hurtling around the corner, face absolutely ashen. Mother's gone into labor. In an instant, any such thoughts of the future courtships were summarily forgotten. Nathaniel didn't walk, he all but sprinted past Cersei, practically bowling her over as he raced for the bedchamber. Jamie followed a more sedate pace. What was the rush? The babe would come when it came. Would it be a girl? Her wondered. Or were they to have another brother? When her labors began, Joanna Lannister she welcomed them wholeheartedly. It was as a difficult birth, one that nearly killed her. All to bring a dwarf into the world. With his birth, she became possessed of the belief that her middle son wasn't normal. Naruto didn't left her side the entire time. Whatever he'd done had healed her, prevented her from bleeding out. Most mothers would have balked at such a display. Not Joanna. She'd sworn to love all her children, and she resolved to love this one, imperfections and all. And so she named their newest son Tyrion. She'd never forget the look on Tywin's face when he saw him. Nor Jaime or Cersei. Or Naruto. Hello Tyrion. She'd always remember the way her second son crooned over the mewling babe in her arms. Welcome to the world. The Martells came to Casterly Rock soon after Tyrion's birth. Oberyn Martell and his sister Elia Martell, to be precise. By the dazed look in their eyes, Naruto knew it was their first time away from Dorne, and neither brother nor sister seemed overmuch fond of anything, not the food, not the weather, not their strange accents, nothing. Not even their own Lord Father who brought them here in the first place. He couldn't blame them, the man had gone off to discuss business with Tywin and left the four of them here in the sitting room to bond as he put it. Which left them at a bit of an impasse, you see. They were only children. No one knew what to do. Or say, for that matter. Well, he did, but he'd prefer not to show his hand just yet. In truth, he found himself empathizing with the plight of the wayward Martell siblings. They looked lost and wholly out of their depth. He'd never been to Dorne, but he expected his reaction would be much the same if he visited their kingdom. King's Landing was crowded to be sure, yet it was nothing compared to the searing heat of the real south. Jaime leaned over to whisper in his ear. They certainly seem friendly. He elbowed his older brother in the ribs. Be nice. Where's Cersei? With mother. Came the sigh. Where else would she be? Naruto winced despite his best efforts. Of course. Cersei disdained such matters. Anyone who isn't us is an enemy, as she was often so fond of saying. She'd only grown more terse these past few weeks. Joanna's survival had been a near thing during Tyrion's birth, and she has never truly gotten over that. Time mended all wounds, but for now her pain was still fresh. She would take a while to adjust. Until then, he'd need to keep an eye on her and Tyrion. He didn't think she might be that stupid, but her emotions always ran hot where family was concerned. Which left him and Jaime to deal with this. So be it. If no one would make the first move, he supposed it fell to him. I'm gonna talk to them. Jaime didn't bother to hide his grin. Father won't like that. Oh yes, he could imagine him saying something to that effect. I didn't raise you to be this foolish. Tywin Lannister was a force to be reckoned with, at home or abroad, even with his family. But what he didn't know wouldn't hurt him. He caught the Martell sibling staring his way, plastered a winning smile across his face, and radiating confidence, walking their way. Jaime followed and let him do the talking, bless his soul. Welcome to the Rock. He offered his right hand. I'm Nathaniel. Oberyn and Elia exchanged a glance between themselves. Naruto kept smiling. These days it was all too easy to slip into the guise of Nathaniel Lannister rather than Naruto Uzumaki. Sometimes he made a game of it, seeing how long he could keep up the act and charm those around him. Oh, he loved his new family, make no mistake, but it was still a bit of a lurch sometimes when he thought of it. The irony wasn't lost on him. In his first life he'd been born to nothing. He'd clawed his way to the top with nothing but grit. Naruto Uzumaki became powerful, but he didn't have true power or influence until nearly the end. Now as Nathaniel Lannister, son of Tywin Lannister, he had wealth, influence, power. Son to the second most powerful man in all of Westeros. While retaining nearly all of his abilities from his first life. The world was his oyster. It wasn't quite the same. He missed Kurama, missed him more than words. Surely he was out there somewhere in this brave new world. He had to be. And he would find him. A stray breeze tugged at his face, drawing him back to the present. Someone had clasped his hand while he was lost in his head. Oberyn, no doubt. Tywin said was a bold one. It is a great pleasure to finally meet you, my lord. A smooth voice captured his ears. Father speaks highly of you. He'd shot up Naruto's neck, burning into his cheeks. That voice did not belong Oberyn. Sure enough, glanced to the right and found Jaime had led him away, striking up a conversation with him. Traitor. He should have known. He didn't like talking to any girl that wasn't Cersei. Inevitably, his gaze was drawn back to Elia Martell. He'd once heard Joanna describe her as, and, he quoted, a gentle, good, and gracious girl, but also frail, due to her delicate health. Kind and clever, with a sweet wit. Looking at her now, he could see that much. She was a pretty girl. Bright bemused eyes beamed back at him from a dark face framed by curtains of ebony black curls. Her smile held none of Cersei's venom. And that pale yellow dress flattered her. More than that, she seemed nice. Not timid and quite willing to chew him out if he wronged her somehow. Right. Protocol. He raised their hands, fingers still intertwined, and kissed her knuckles. My lady. Oh? Elia Martell did not titter and flush, but rather laughed and arched a dark brow at him. Is that how you Westerlanders greet a Dornish woman? It is how a proper lord greets a beautiful lady, yes. He couldn't quite hide the wry smile behind his retort, less so when she snorted. Sassy girl. He liked her already. HMM. Oberyn's sister lowered her hand but didn't let go of his and wound up tugging his arm down with hers in the process as her eyes flitted up to meet his. We've heard curious things about you in the south, Nathaniel Lannister. You live up to your reputation, I'll give you that. He squeezed her hand. Walk with me. I believe I shall. Elia accepted with good grace, allowing him to lead her, pausing only to crane her neck and look back. Oberyn. Can I trust you to behave yourself while I'm gone? Her brother snorted. I could say the same of you, dear sister. She rolled her eyes. Do you have anything like the water gardens here? Water gardens? He chuckled softly as they walked. Now, we don't have one of those, but we do have a stone garden. The Dornish woman blinked at him. How can a garden be made of stone? Naruto chuckled a little at her innocence. Let me show you. Down through the rock he led her, into the very bowels of the keep. Elia proved herself both an amiable and inquisitive guest, filling the silence between them with questions as they continued their descent. At times, it seemed she wanted to know everything. Did they still have lions in the keep? Was Lan the Clever real? Had they found Brightrer, their ancestral Valyrian steel blade yet? It made for good conversation, and he reveled in the chance to talk with someone new for the first time in months. In nearly no time at all they reached their destination. Here we are. Naruto swept an arm out before himself. Take a look. The stone garden was a godswood, nestled in a cave within the rock. It contained a twisted old weirwood whose tangled roots have almost filled the cave, choking out all other growth. The face carved within had its eyes open, unlike some, and those eyes almost seemed to stare their way now, observing the two of them. Elia clutched at his hand, shivered a little. He didn't. He found the old tree comforting. It always felt like something was watching over him here. Protecting him. He liked to come to this place when he was alone. It brought him small semblance of peace when his heart was troubled. Sometimes mother joined him. Cersei had on occasion, before Tyrion was born. She prayed for his sister. Instead she got a deformed little brother that nearly killed her mother, a sibling she seemed to hate with all her heart. So that's a weirwood tree. He looked her way. You don't have them in Dorne? We do not. Father says they cannot grow in the hot climate. What brings you this far west? Not that I'm complaining, mind you. Father decided it was high time Oberyn and I saw the other 6 kingdoms. Elia flicked a strand of dark hair out her eyes. Casterly Rock is merely the third one stop of many. We've already been to both Storm's End and Highgarden. Realization broke like the dawn over the narrow sea. Traveling this far meant one of two things. Either their father genuinely wished for Elia and Oberyn to see the rest of the continent, or, and this was far more likely, they were touring the keeps of each kingdom for a far simpler reason. To get a better look at the sons and daughters of Westeros. That meant marriage pacts, both for Oberyn and Elia alike. Was that why they were here? To find paramours? Were they after Jaime? It made a twisted sort of sense, really. Jaime was heir to Casterly Rock and future Warden of the West. Not him. Why would anyone care about him? A second son was only ever a spare, after all. He shook the ugly thought off and smiled at Elia. And how do you like the kingdom so far? In the case of Storm's End. She made a face. Wet. Highgarden was greener, but Oberyn and I were not accustomed to the climate. A thought occurred to him. He pounced upon it. Well, if you dislike them, I wouldn't recommend King's Landing, then. The Princess of Dorne tilted her head just so. And why not? It smells of shit and 500,000 many people crammed in a small place. He rolled his shoulders in a shrug. To say nothing of the criminals. It's no place to start a family, let alone raise children. Elia blanched. I'll keep that in mind. It'll only get colder as you go north, you know. That earned him a cross look. We have not been to Winterfell yet. I do not think we will be. There is nothing for us there but snow and ice. Ah, yes. He'd heard tales of the illustrious Starks. Grim bunch, they were. Had to be up there. Those northerners didn't have time to play the game, there wasn't any time for it. They were far too focused on survival. He almost envied them at times. A life almost free from endless politicking and beepering about at court. It sounded far simpler than the life he currently led. Another thought nagged at him. Is that only reason you came here? Well, Elia confessed, we were hoping to see the imp while we were here in the west. His blood ran cold. Imp. Everyone's raving about your little brother. She barreled on, heedless of his sudden stillness. They say he's a monster, that he has claws and scales. His face closed down, all traces of emotions draining away. And what do you think? That I wish to see for myself. She huffed. Naruto opened his mouth to retort. The whisper caressed his ear. Approach. It felt like, how could he describe it? A gentle breeze, warm wind caressing his very soul. Both pleasant and unpleasant at the same time. He spun, startled by the sudden voice. Did you hear that? Elia frowned at him, utterly baffled. I heard nothing. He shook his head. I thought I heard a voice. Do not ignore this, son of fire. There it was again. Something tickled his senses. Inexorably, his gaze was drawn to the weirwood tree. Approach. The voice or voices were all but a command now. You are needed. Absurd. Trees didn't whisper. They certainly didn't talk, did they? The edge close to the weirwood touched a hand to the pale, scarred bark. In an instant he found himself falling. He opened his eyes and saw. It was like looking into a cracked mirror. He saw and heard countless things at once, flashes of things that were and was, events that should and should not be. And he heard 3 words. Burn them all. Ares Targaryen shrieked of traitors and in turncoats from the Iron Throne. A lion broke bread with a snake and wolf and a dragon, while King's Landing erupted in a plume of wildfire. A scarlet dragon egg was pressed into someone's hands. A great shadow fell over the capital. Kurama's laughter rang in his head. He heard the last gasps of a dying woman, the awful ring of steel striking steel amidst the screams of dying men. The wail of terrified children. Saw a sword plunge through the Mad King's chest. Another swept in from the side, took his head clean off at the shoulders and sent it spinning across the floor. Burned them all. Someone climbed over the Mad King's corpses, lowered themselves onto the Iron Throne and sat there. He couldn't see their face. It was like looking at a shadow. The more he tried to focus, the more it seemed to shift and writhe before his eyes. A crown was placed upon the shadow's head. Men and women knelt before him as one. Ice crept in from the north, inching toward the capital. Dead men marched on living. They were met by light and dragons. And there, rising above it all, those damnable 3 words haunted him still. Burn them all. Nathaniel. Someone grabbed him by the shoulder and yanked. Hard. Snap out of it. Reality snapped back like a rubber band. Naruto. He noticed Jamie and Auburn standing nearby with a distraught Elia. His brother was gripping his left arm, fingers biting down hard enough to cause pain. When had they caught up to them? And why did he look so pale? What's wrong? He squinted their way, not understanding why they all looked so distressed. Why the long faces? You've been staring at the weirwood for the last hour. Jamie released his arm. Elia had to come find us. What's gotten into you? Had he? How did he explain what he'd just seen? Did he even dare speak of it? They'd think him mad. The world already had one madman too many. A cursory glance at Elia only made him all the more concerned. Her fan face looked pale indeed, her eyes terribly wide. She was holding his hand again, but she'd been holding his hand when he touched the tree, hadn't she? What had she seen? What indeed? Just daydreaming, I guess. He shook himself free, mustered a smile he didn't feel, and stifled a yawn with the back of his hand. Probably trained a little too much last night. Must have dozed off on my feet. Yes. Elia seized on the change of topic with gusto, grasping at it like the lifeline it was. Something had rattled her. He wondered what it was. I hear you're quite skilled with the spear. Jamie barked a laugh, all too eager to forget what he'd seen. Skilled, she says. That's putting it mildly. He nearly took my hand off yesterday. Kurama would have howled with laughter were he still within him. Naruto settled for his own, strained though it was. I'm good with daggers, too. His smile became a grin. The sword as well. Is that so? He must have caught Auburn's attention now, because Elia's brother slung an arm around his shoulder and drew him his way with a sly smile all his own. Care to prove it? Ah, now they were speaking the same language. He squared his shoulders and returned his grin tenfold. Is that a challenge? Wouldn't want to hurt that pretty face of yours. The hand settled on his shoulder. Come now, you are the second son of your family, while I am merely the third of mine. I'm sure they won't mind. He quirked a blonde brow his way. They might mind when I knock you on your arse. This time, Jamie didn't bother to hide his laugh. Most little lordlings or ladies would have given up the goose then and there, cut their losses and called it a day. Auburn was not most. He was a prince of Dorne, perhaps even heir to Sunspear someday if he played his cards right. Any prince-to-be would be trained in combat. They must be, if only to defend themselves. And if Auburn was offering him a duel, who was he to refuse? Real men let their fists doing the talking, or their weapons, if they were particularly keen on them. He might not be so fortunate. Elia clicked her tongue at him. Auburn. What? He tutted at her. I merely wish to see if your dear lion has claws. She scoffed. He isn't my dear anything, little brother. Then why are you still holding his hand, sister? Jamie chuckled. He has you there. Elia couldn't free her hand fast enough. Her face had gone an alarming shade of red. Naruto started laughing. It was easy to lose himself in the byplay, the back and forth. To forget what he'd seen when he touched the tree. But he couldn't. Not completely. He didn't think he ever could, no matter how much he might wish otherwise. Found you. Cersei came rushing down the steps leading to the stone garden. She took one look at his distraught expression, realized something was wrong, and launched herself at him. Slim arms wrapped around his head and drew him close to her. For once, he found himself grateful for her presence. Her clinginess, even. Strange as it might sound, he wanted to be held by someone in this instant. Cersei recognized that somehow, that something was bothered him, and he allowed it. Even if she was his sister. That gratitude faded when he saw Cersei's expression. His sister was smirking at Elia, wearing that insufferable little "I know something that you don't" grin he'd come to despise over the years. It soured any lingering semblance of peace he might have felt. "Why are you all hiding down here in the depths?" She tutted at the Martells. "Don't you want to see our baby brother?" "Of course we do, Lady Lannister," Oberyn replied. "But we didn't know the way to the nursery." "Well, now you shall." She released him, turned and beckoned as though she were the queen herself. "Come. This way." Naruto exchanged an uneasy look with Jaime. His brother shrugged helplessly. What else could he do? Up they went once more, retracing their steps, the journey made in silence. No one spoke. No one dared, if only because they dreaded what might lay in wait ahead. Soon enough, Cersei led them to the nursery. Mercifully, Naruto found no blood within. He could hear Tyrion in his little crib. He immediately noted Joanna's absence, however. "Where's mother?" "With the septa," she replied primly. "Praying." His eyes narrowed. "What are you up to?" "Nothing at all, brother of mine." She cooed. Still smiling, she turned to face the Martell siblings, grasping at the veil over. "Look at him." She unveiled the crib. "Behold our monster." Oberyn and Elia peered at him. The latter gasped not in shock or horror, but sympathy. "That's not a monster. That's a baby." Oberyn leaned in to get a better look and frowned. "His head may be a bit large, his arms and legs are small, but he's not a monster." In that instant Naruto knew he'd be lifelong friends with him, to the last of his days. If he'd called Tyrion a monster he would have decked him. "It doesn't matter." Cersei sneered, heedless to their byplay. "He nearly killed my mother. Everyone says he will die soon. I hope they're right." She reached in and pinched his nose shut, drawing a distressed cry from the poor babe. "He shouldn't not have lived this long." Crack. Why did his hand hurt so much? Naruto looked down. Jaime gasped and he saw why. His arm was extended, knuckles clenched into a fist. There was blood on his hands. He didn't remember moving. Just a flash of anger. Cersei stumbled back, gaping girlishly at him as she clutched at her bloody nose. "Little brother, you hit me. How dare you?" Anger sparked again. His fist unclenched and his arm moved. Crack. Cersei recoiled, now clutching at the throbbing red handprint he'd left upon her right cheek. "How dare I? How dare you?" His words cracked out again like a whip. "I'll do worse than that if you touch Tyrion again. Father will punish you." She shrieked. "Just wait until I tell him. Go ahead. See if I care. Spoiled so." Out she stumbled, Jaime chased after with a rueful sigh. Naruto felt a brief bang of guilt and made to follow, if only for his brother's sake. "My friend," Oberyn slung an arm around his shoulder, stopping him short. "I think you and I will get along famously." Elia nodded her agreement and smiled sweetly at him. Naruto felt his heart skip a beat. Oh, dear. He'd not planned for this. Dewin stared at his son from behind his desk. To his credit, Nathaniel didn't falter, nor had he protested when summoned. On the contrary, his second son impressed him. Rather than bow and beg for mercy as any normal child might when faced with the wrath of his father, this early boy raised his chin, set his face in a determined scowl, and matched him glare for glare. He'll need to watch that in the future. A tell like that gives him away. Nathaniel had a bad habit of doing such when threatened, squaring up his shoulders, planting his feet and standing his ground, no matter the odds. Doubtless he'd gotten that fro his mother. Joanna wasn't afraid to give him a piece of her and if need be, and neither was he. For if his lady wife was the sort fight a dragon to protect her children, then Nathaniel would happily slay one to keep Casterly Rock safe. He was stubborn, with a good heart and the will to match. It was going to get him killed one of these days. But sitting here staring at one another wasn't going to get them anywhere. The wind steepled his fingers in the silence. "I understand you struck your sister." "I did." "May I ask why?" Nathaniel clicked his tongue. "You know why. She was being a bitch." "Well." This time, Nathaniel broke the silence first. "What's it to be, then? Whipping? Flogging? Are you going to take 2 of my fingers?" By the 7, the boy was all jagged edges when he wanted to be. At times like these, Nathaniel seemed sharper beyond his years, an old man in a youngster's body. Nonsense, surely. Snarks and grumpkins, that sort of thing. He'd simply taken to his lessons better than most. Nathaniel still didn't budge. Dewin felt the ghost of a smile tug at the corner of his mouth. Nathaniel had a way of doing that to him, drawing a smirk out of him when few else could. But it didn't change what he'd done. "You know why I'm angry?" He began to drum his fingers against the desk, from smallest to large, one after the other. Because I struck Cersei. Tywin gave him a moment to think. And then, no. No? His boy blinked, not quite comprehending his statement. No. Tywin replied, drawing out the word. You were well within your rights. I should have taken a firmer hand with her long ago. Your brother has been of no use on that front. With any luck you slapped some sense into her today. And if I haven't? Then you are free to take her to task again if she acts in such an unbecoming manner. The boy's brow furrowed. I could make her a better person. But if you're not angry about that, then why am I here? Now was as good a time for a lesson as any. Tell me, why do you believe you are here? Nathaniel squinted at him. Frowned now. Because of the spectacle I made. Good. Tywin nearly leaped from his desk as he shouted the word. You're finally asking the right questions. I am cross with you not because you struck your sister, but because you did so before witnesses. A brief pause not to let the weight of his words sink. You made us appear weak before the Martell children, and although their father was thankfully not there to see, they've surely told him by now. She was pinching Tyrion's. Tywin held up a hand to forestall an argument. I am aware. Jaime told me. I didn't say your actions were unjustified. But you will not fight in public. Do you understand? Nathaniel hung his head and kicked at the floor. As you wish. Last. He couldn't stand to see the boy, the one he'd begun to pin his hopes on, sulk like that. He tapped a finger against the desk. Come here. His son obeyed. What do you see? Nathaniel glanced to the map sprawled across his desk. Westeros. The Seven Kingdoms. And? A moment of silence. Legacies. The future. Yes. He stabbed a finger down on Casterly Rock. There's a reason the name Lannister is remembered, not that of the Casterlys. It's the family name that lives on. Not your brother's personal glory, not Cersei's deluded notions of power, but family. Family is important. It is all that lives on. It must. It will. Nathaniel looked to him. Will it? Twin spread his hands across the desk and leaned forward. Your brother wants to be a Kingsguard with no idea of what that horrid position entails. Your sister rails at anyone who dares to oppose her, all the while thinking herself more clever than anyone alive, and Tyrion is my brother. Nathaniel met his gaze evenly. And your son. That much he could not deny no matter his deformity, nor the danger he'd placed Joanna in. He is my son if he lives. Do you think he won't? He shrugged. Dwarves have been known to die young. You know this. I do. Something dark passed through the boy's gaze. And I'll be watching over him to make sure he does live. He's family. HRRM. He understood that, at least. Perhaps there was hope for Nathaniel yet. Tywin took his hand from the map and brought it down on his son's shoulder. We must appear united. Always. Do you understand? Nathaniel nodded. Someday you will marry and take a wife of your own. He paused, considered the matter for a moment, grappled with it, then spoke his heart's true desire. When the day comes that you do, seek out a good match. Find a partner that pleases you, someone with whom you can spend the rest of your life with, as I have. That will make all the difference in the years to come. And should you father any bastards? His boy stood a little straighter and clasped both hands behind his back. I'll see them looked after. As you should. If your brother does become a Kingsguard, you will be named my heir. Do you understand what that means? Another nod. I'll rule the rock after you die. You just might. Gods be good, at least he'd been blessed with one child that listened. Which made it all the more important that he understand. You possess gifts not seen since the doom of Valyria. I would have you keep them secret, and if you cannot manage that, use them sparingly. Mulish defiance burned in the boy's gaze. Mother would have died without them. I know. Tywin fought down a shudder at the ghastly image his mind conjured. To even dwell on such a thing, no. He dare not. And I shall spend my entire life repaying the debt I owe you for her own. But you have enemies enough without making more. Pycelle already fears you, and he commands a great deal of influence among the Mesters. Here at last, a hint of Lannister anger burned through the boy's bright eyes. Dodgy old coot. I don't trust him. He's not half as senile as he claims to be. The cold joy awoke in Tywin's heart. No, he is not. He remains loyal to the Lannisters, but you would do well to mind your food and drink. I will. Silence stretched between them. Tywin let it linger for a moment longer, then chose another avenue of attack. Elia Martell. What do you think of her? Nathaniel wasn't stupid, he caught on at once. He knew what he was getting at. She's nice. Sweet, but clever, and not afraid to speak her mind. Interesting. He'd scorned suitors before. What had changed? You find her tolerable, then? We just met. Nathaniel retorted. She's wild, free, and exciting. Your mother thinks she would be a good match for you. Jaime would have argued. Cersei would have flew into a rage. Nathaniel did none of these things. He flushed yes, but he didn't burst into protests. He knew his duty to the family. I just met her today. He did not flee when he spoke, she seems alright. And you may yet meet her again if the gods are good. Thought you didn't believe in the gods. I didn't until you were born. Nathaniel didn't rise to the bait. He understood. Their house was strong, but their foothold was still precarious outside of Westeros. Even after he'd eradicated the Rains and Tarbecks, many a noble lady had vied for his hand, for he was hand of the king. Joanna had bested them all. He'd slighted many a lord and lady when he chose to marry within the family. Old grudges like that tended to fester, growing rotten over time. He'd had the chance to choose. His children might not so fortunate. Nathaniel aside, Jaime and Cersei must marry for the sake of the family, for advantage. Even Tyrion, if he survived, would be expected to do such. Speaking of advantage. You're still writing to the queen, I trust. Nathaniel slumped where he stood. Uncle Kevin noticed, didn't he? He might have. Truth be told, Tywin was inordinately grateful for his younger brother's keen eye. In the weeks following Tyrion's difficult birth, he'd not spoken with Nathaniel on the matter of his secret correspondence. There had been much to do, and as he was set to return to his duties in King's Landing, soon Aerys was demanding his return, practically howling for it. Really, his mind was preoccupied with a great many tasks. But not Kevin. He hadn't failed to notice the ravens coming to and from the rock. A short while ago, he had told him to see such frivolities. But now the realm was beginning to tip. Who could say which way it would fall? Those harmless letters between him and Queen Rhaella might make all the difference in the years to come. And if there was a war? A mad idea entered Tywin's mind. He did not dismiss it, but instead shelved it away for later use. If that's your one vice, then so be it. He rounded the desk and planted a hand on his shoulder. But for God's sake, be careful and don't use your name when you write to her. Aerys would be all too happy to tear you away from Casterly Rock. From your mother and I. Nathaniel wrinkled his nose. Don't want to be a Kingsguard. Too many oaths. Tywin arched a pale brow. And if the king demands it? I'll tell him exactly what I think of him. Tywin actually laughed at that, a rare bark of genuine laughter that echoed through the keep. It surprised even him. He could imagine it now. Nathaniel already held a low opinion of Aerys, one they both shared. For a single mad moment, he saw it in his mind's eye. Mad king indeed. Nathaniel scoffed and spat at the feet of Aerys. I've seen far worse things than you, Aerys Targaryen, horrors that would make you seem sane. You won't take me. You can't. You're weak. Good. He shook himself from the daydream and chuckled ruefully. Then, more softly now, good. You've more sense in your head than Jaime. I'll say it again, you're blessed with abilities that few possess. You're blessed to belong to the most powerful family in the kingdoms. And you're still blessed with youth. And what are you going to do with these blessings, He tilted his head to regard him, one lion to another. Be a glorified bodyguard. Nathaniel shook his head. No. That's not me. Because you have ambition. Another nod. Tywin was seldom the sort to smile, save on rare occasions. He did so now. Ambition. Yes, that was the difference between Nathaniel and Jaime, between him and Cersei as well. Jaime wanted to swing a sword all his life because he was good at it. Nothing more. Cersei wanted to be his heir, but that could not happen, nor would it, because she was not always of sound mind. Nathaniel wasn't satisfied with being the second son. He wanted to rise in the world. With talents like his, he would. He was a true lion and woe betide those who met his claws. Which is precisely why I need you to become the man you were always meant to be. Tywin squeezed his shoulder, and when that wasn't enough, drew him into a firm if brief embrace. Drawing back, he gave his head a pat. Not tomorrow, not next week, now. You must be prepared should the worst happen. Now, back to the matter of the Martell girl. The door to his chambers swept open. Joanna marched through, wearing a dangerous smile. Oh, dear. Tywin knew that smile. He knew it far too well. Dear husband, surely you weren't discussing our son's future without me, were you? Tywin sank back into his seat. It was the wisest course of action, given her expression. You were resting. I did not wish to disturb you. No, you simply decided to mention the Martell girl on a lark. She cast a glance to a bemused Nathaniel and unbent enough to kiss the boy's head. Go check on your little brother, dear. She tousled his golden hair with one hand, smiling softly. Your father and I have much to discuss. Nathaniel needed no further prodding, he scampered out and slammed the door behind him. Tywin pinched the bridge of his nose. Was that necessary? I deemed it so. Joanna sat upon the desk and propped one leg up, exposing a pale thigh to his wanting eyes. So yes. Quite necessary. His throat went dry. Gods, but she knew how to torment him. How are you feeling? Very much recovered, thanks to our son. She granted him a lascivious wink, and realization dawned. Exceptional, even. And lonely. Her gaze pierced his. You're leaving for King's Landing tomorrow. It was not a question. She always saw right through him. I am, and you wanted him out of the room. I did. She grinned. Now then, will you be taking your trousers off, or shall I do it for you? Doan stood. Joanna caught him halfway, crushing her mouth against his. He swept an arm across the desk, clearing it, pressing her atop it. Far be it from him to refuse his lady wife. Naruto heard the noises behind the door and closed his ears to them. On one hand, he was hardly a stranger to that sort of thing in his first life. But still, these were his second parents. His new family. It was like imagining Minato and Kushina going at it. His mind recoiled. You. Not thinking about that. They're gonna give me another sibling at this rate, and wouldn't that be amusing? It was a strange thing indeed to be the middle child of 4, but he wasn't about to complain. He wouldn't mind another brother or sister. Maybe another girl would keep Cersei sane. Or not. He really couldn't understand her sometimes. She'd shown a flash of kindness down in the stone garden, only to turn and be a vicious little witch minutes later. He'd figure her out one of these days. But not today. In the end, he left his new parents to it and let his feet carry him back to Tyrion's nursery. By some stroke of luck or fate, he didn't stumble into Cersei on the way. He expected the Septa was giving her a tongue lashing. Or maybe Jaime was not, he decided. Not Jaime. He adored Cersei and he didn't want to think of them right now. Quick steps carried him to his little brother's cradle. The please babble greeted his arrival. Good. He remembered him. Hey, little brother. He let the facade drop just for him, and how are we doing? The tiny hand pawed at one of his fingers but couldn't quite reach with those stubby arms. His heart lurched and he reached in the rest of the way, allowing the infant to grasp his hand. For some reason he found himself fiercely protective of him, dwarf or no. He hadn't asked to be born this way, just as he hadn't asked to be a Jinchuriki all those years ago. In a way, they were the same. Hashirama would have scolded him for such soft sentiment, but there it was. Someone had to look out for the little guy. Jaime should, but even if he wouldn't, he'd be here for him. His gaze straight back to Tyrion. Could he heal him? Fix his dwarfism? Did he dare try when he wasn't even a year old? Kurama had left him, but his healing talents remained. Shouldn't he use them? Was it not his duty to help those in need whenever they may need it? He reached a hand toward Tyrion but winced at the last instant. Doing so when his little brother was so young might well kill him outright. It would entail breaking bones and all other manner of unpleasantness, building his body. But he could help him later in life, even if only meant a few inches at a time, he would. There. He stroked his head. I won't let anyone hurt you. The door creaked open behind him, then shut again. He blew out a sigh. Jaime, that better be you. The knife slammed into his back. The world lurched. Naruto's sixth sense screamed, but he did not. Pain. He'd almost forgotten what it felt like after all this time. He could feel the blade buried to the hilt in his back, sliding against the muscle of his shoulder, but it all seemed dim, somehow. He'd taken worse wounds than this. It barely tickled. He pivoted to face his attacker, a man clad in all black. Their face was strangely familiar. He blew out a sigh. Definitely not Jaime. His attacker drew another knife and lunged. Even in this weaker body of his reflexes and strength remained. He was no stranger to pain, and the dagger hadn't struck anything vital. He caught the hand trying to end his life by the wrist, stilling it an inch from his chest. At that angle it would have punched up into his ribs and pierced his heart. In his grasp, that blade didn't budge an inch. That vaguely familiar visage stared back at him, writ with confusion. Naruto squinted at it as he grappled with his attacker. Aha. He recognized that beard and those silver-gray eyes at long last. Marcus. One of the castle servants. He'd known the man for years. Why do this? It didn't make a lick of sense, nor did the flicker of surprise in his eyes. They'd thought to kill him twice now, and both times, they'd failed. A spark of anger flitted through their gaze. So he cut it out. In a single seamless movement he reached up, grabbed the dagger still sheathed in his shoulder, and tore it free. Then he slashed it across their face. That should have been the end of things. It wasn't. The face of Marcus fell away beneath his borrowed blade as they spun away. Literally peeled back and struck the floor to reveal another, one he didn't know. That face stared at him impassively. Naruto hissed out a breath. A faceless man. Were they here for Tyrion? No, that didn't make sense. Any common cutthroat could try to kill him. So why send Oh. He understood now. They were here for him, weren't they? Someone had put a price on his head. He almost felt flattered. A wry laugh escaped him as sweat beaded his brow. What's the going price for the son of Tywin Lannister these days? They didn't answer. Of course they didn't. He straightened up with a wince. Right, then. Faceless men often worked in pairs, so where was? The shadow dropped from the ceiling. He twisted aside at the last instant, grunting only a little as a sword kissed his right cheek, then snapped a kick into their ribs. His attacker hissed in pain and tumbled away, crashing into their comrade. The reprieve was brief, but he used it to his advantage and filled his lungs with air. "Guards." His voice boomed out. "Over here. Guards." He looked back just in time to parry a dagger that would have taken his left eye. Sparks sprayed as steel struck steel. Over his shoulder he regarded the second attacker from before, a svelte woman even now rising from the floor. He didn't recognize her face. She hadn't killed one of the servants as her companion had. It changed nothing. Dead was dead. They would be soon. "The boy is afraid." The girl intoned solemnly as she approached. "A boy only makes his death more painful by resisting." "Ah, this one was arrogant." He scoffed. Two could play that game. A girl should be terrified. She blinked. "Of whom? You?" "Yes." Naruto didn't deign to say the word aloud. Why say anything to dead men and women? Pivoting, he parried a slash, ducked another, pulling upon the natural energy in the air as he did. He pulled hard. Blue orbs smoldered into gold, amber dust shimmering over his eyelids. Old, familiar strength rushed through him. His next punch shattered ribs and flayed flesh. The first faceless man stumbled back, clutching at his bloody side. The dagger swiped down on his arm and shattered. "Do you have any idea who I am?" He twirled his borrowed dagger over his knuckles. "No, how could you? That's alright, you'll learn." A single step put him between them. The world dissolved into a mad whirlwind of motion. He parried a dagger with a wrist, caught the woman's blade in his free fist, and shattered it with a single squeeze. He snatched up one of the shards and punched backward, burying it in the belly of the first faceless man. It didn't go as deep as he would have liked. He felt his body growing sluggish. Poison. Of course they'd poisoned their blades. Poison hadn't killed him in the last life, and it wouldn't kill him in this. It barely even slowed him down now. An annoyed backhand drove the no-openless girl away, giving him time to round on her wounded companion. They slashed at him. Weak. He slapped it aside. "Now it ends." Naruto pounced on them and tackled them to the floor. He landed on their chest, all but mounting them, and grabbed their skull with both hands, plunged his fingers into their eye sockets. Hands scrabbled at his face, but he wouldn't be denied. From there he took a page from Gregor Clegane's book. He squeezed. The faceless man screamed and screamed and screamed. Until his head burst like a ripe melon. Bloody viscera spattered his face. Covered in it, he stood and turned to face the woman who yet remained. She faltered. "Huh." Faceless men didn't flinch. The girl must be new. "What are you?" "Do you?" "Death." "Now run." He cast her dead comrade's blade down at her feet. "Tell all of Bravos what you saw here today. Go now, before I change my mind." She stepped back, knelt, laid her dagger at his feet, and flung herself out the nearest window. The door crashed open a heartbeat later. Gold eyes shimmered back into blue. Adrenaline failed him and the poison caught up with him. Naruto tried to take a step, only for his legs to buckle. Someone caught him before he could dash his head against the stones. He looked up and saw Cersei's terrified face staring down at him. Oh. Someone had cut her cheek. "Don't die." She begged, shaking him hard. "Please. You can't die." "I'm not gonna die," he tried to say, "I'm just damn sleepy." But words wouldn't come. He blacked out. In the days that followed, Naruto swam in and out of consciousness. This was not death, in truth he would have much rather preferred it to this hellish torment. This was much more annoying than simply being dead. He was aware of everything, every ache, every pain, every injury, but unable to move. What did a master once called it? Lucid dreaming. Yes, that was it. The poison left him a prisoner in his own body. His blood felt like it was on fire. He would wake one moment then fall into slumber the next, and when he did, his dreams were dark and filled with dreary fevered things. If he still had Kurama, he could have fought it off in a day. Now he had to beat it back the hard way. He'd been foolish, lowering his guard like that in his own home. Never again. And as he dreamed, he heard voices. "It is a miracle he still lives, my lord. The poison is a potent one." That was undoubtedly Picel speaking. Most would have passed 3 days ago. 3 days had he been asleep that long. Curious that said poison is missing from your own stores. He knew Tuwin's voice anywhere. How inconvenient. "My lord. I have always served the house of Lannister. Always." "So you say. Know this. If he dies so do you." No. Picel hadn't done this. He had to tell them, warn them. He lacked the strength to open his eyes, but he still had control of his arms and legs. It took a supreme effort of will on his part to move the former, but move it he did, slapping a hand down on the bed. A harsh bang echoed through the room. He heard a sharp gasp behind it and imagined both men rounding on him. Odds, his throat felt so dry. Not dead yet. Tuwin was at his side in a flash. He felt the man grab his hand. You must be strong. Who attacked you? No point in conserving energy. He used his two to gasp out two words. Faceless men. Thuin was silent for a terribly long time. And then. How many? Two. He rasped. Killed one. Scared the other away. Preposterous. Picel's voice sputtered somewhere beside him. How does one frighten a faceless man? By killing them. Naruto hissed back. The Martells, are they safe? Are they alright? They are. They have returned to Dorne. Elia left for you. Good. He'd been the only target then. That was a relief. His lungs hurt so much. So very much. Need to rest now. Tired. Save your strength, we'll speak more when you wake. When? Not if. Even now father acted like he could simply will death away. Doin' father? Said something else. On the verge of sleeping, Naruto almost didn't hear him. Almost. Send the ravens. Picel wheezed. Is that wise? I will tell you what is wise. Do it. Now. The ghost of a smile tugged at Naruto's face. Ha! The wrath of the lion had been unleashed. He almost pitied whoever was responsible. Their death would be slow. When the darkness of slumber came for him once again, this time, he went with it willingly. They attacked my son. 4 words. 4 words and everyone seated at the high table before Tywin Lannister flinched. 4 words, and yet they couldn't possibly begin to describe the sheer breadth of rage that coursed through the Warden of the West in this moment. Oh, the rage. The hate. The wrath. He was well through the fire and the flames now and into ice. Frigid and cold, a blizzard to make even the fiercest storm in the north seem a mild breeze by comparison. His very blood felt arctic, it was a miracle his heart was still beating. Who would do such a thing? Who would dare strike at him, at his children in the heart of his domain? They'd targeted Nathaniel. Not him. Not Joanna. Not Jaime and Cersei, or even baby Tyrion in his crib. No, they'd gone for his son. His hope. His legacy. Who? Would. Dare. Tywin could think of many possibilities, several of whom would want him dead. He had no shortage of enemies. But few possessed the means or money to strike at Casterly Rock in such a manner. His son had killed one of his would-be killers before the poison hobbled him. How he took pride in that. While the other appeared to have fled rather than fight him. He did not dare leave the rock until his recovery. Ares could come crawling up here if he wanted him back. Which, once again, begged the question. Who had the funds? Who had the motivation? The Mesters of all Tuan were one such entity, but unlikely. They were not foolish enough to provoke him. Many a magister across the narrow sea might command such wealth, but few would be foolish enough to provoke him. Which left? Ares? Could it be possible? He almost didn't want to consider it, though it was quite likely. Who but a madman would do something so brash? He likely knew Nathaniel had gifts. Perhaps he thought him a mage. Perhaps he was. Perhaps that was why he did it. Jealousy. Petty spite. Mindless base cruelty. He'd long lusted after Joanna and never quite forgiven her for spurning his affections. Who could say? Once upon a time, Ares had been a good man, a decent man, a sane man. But that man was dead, and if not dead, dying a little more each day. If it truly was Ares, then the ghost of his memory wouldn't save him. He would act, but he would do so careful. The so-called dragon would die a death of 1,000 pinpricks. The house that puts family first survives. And so Tywin did, he held the secret close, even as he acted to protect the family. And so he summoned those of the family most trusted into this room, locked the doors, and commanded both the Mountain and the Hound to stand guard outside. The brothers Clegane had standing orders to kill anyone who approached. That, at least, should keep word from reaching the spider's ears for a time. Ares would learn of this eventually, of course. A gathering like this was impossible to miss. Joanna stood beside him, rocking a restless Tyrion in her arms. A fretful Cersei and Jaime sat together close by, exchanging anxious glances. Even his own siblings were in attendance. Loyal and faithful Kevin, his gaze sharp as ever. Restless Tyged and ever-japing Jirian. Jenna fretted over the twins, whispering soothing words to them to keep them from tears. Tywin appreciated her efforts, though he refused to say it aloud. He couldn't comfort them yet. Not yet. Not until this matter was dealt with. His siblings differed on their course of action. He even wanted to call the banners. Jenna demanded proof before they acted. Tyged advocated telling the realm of this attack, if not the culprit the better, to protect their families. Jirian was silent. Almost eerily so. No jokes from his younger brother today. There was a dark, haunted look in his eyes. He said not a word. You know why you are here. Tywin looked upon them all, commanding their attention with but a glance. If another house can strike at one of our own with impunity, we are no longer a house to be respected or feared. I'm in this world a little while longer to defend the Lannisters, to defend my blood, your blood, and I will not stand idly by and let shadows in the dark strike at us. Nor will any of you. This is what we will do. He detailed his plans to them further, speaking long and at length. His family listened. Not a soul objected. Now, all of you out. A pause followed as he looked to one of them in particular. Not you. Jamie paused at the door. Father was furious. One look was all it took. Jamie had never seen him quite like this before, it terrified him. None of that icy fury was sent his way, and yet he quivered beneath it all the same. He'd always seemed so unshakable, immovable like Casterly Rock itself. But his father was not a rock. He was a lion. And he had his claws. Today, he was reminded. Mother paused to kiss his forehead before she left the room. Uncle Kevin clasped his shoulder and shooed Cersei out with his aunt and uncles. He barely had time to share a look with her, then she was gone. All the while, father stared at him. He didn't say a word until the door closed. Jamie had thought himself prepared. When he finally spoke, he wasn't. Come here. Tuin beckoned. We have work to do. He stepped closer. And what work is that? Vengeance. His father's face was grim. Tell me, what would you do to protect your brother? As if he need ask such a thing. I'd do anything. You know that. Father tilted his head. Anything, you say. Tyrion was crying. The poor babe hadn't stopped crying since they'd left the room. There, sweetling. Joanna crooned, rocking him in Hour's arms. Have faith. Your brother will be fine. He had to live. He must. He was her boy, her golden boy, her miracle child. If he died the world would hear the lioness roar. She would burn Bravos to the ground. Her little brother wouldn't wake up. No matter what Pycelle did. No matter what he tried. Nathaniel resisted all treatment. He lay in his bed, still and pale, barely breathing. Looking upon him now, Cersei felt her heart clench. She had never feared death before today, never once thought it might come for her and hers. She'd always thought herself untouchable. Invincible. Death was for the common folk. Disease for peasants. Poison for fools who dared to rise against House Lannister. Never once had she thought the latter would strike here. But it had. Death had visited Casterly Rock and it wanted Nathaniel. So very badly. She knelt by his side, clasped her hands, and closed her eyes. Let him live. She prayed to the gods as she'd never prayed before. Let him live, and I promise I'll change. I swear I'll be a better sister. A better person. I swear it. By the old gods and the new. Even to Tyrion. The words tasted like ash in her mouth, Cersei choked them down all the same. I promise, I promise, I promise. She didn't know if she could keep that promise, or if the gods would even listen to her bargain. But if meant her brother, her perfect golden little brother who had toddled after her from the moment he could walk, would live. She would gladly give her all. Let him live and I'll give you everything. All that I am. She squeezed her shut eyes tight, trying to will her prayer into existence. Every bit of it. Please, please, please. She wasn't the only one praying. But how could she possibly know such? Nearly a world away, a queen was praying for entirely different reasons. Hope. How long had it been since she'd felt hope? Queen Rhaella clutched the letter to her chest, exhaled quickly, and dared to look at it again. His latest reply was simple. 3 little words written in a loose scrawl. Let me help. The queen knew had long wondered at the identity of her writing paramour, although the letter bore no signature and proper seal upon the wax. She'd been exchanging many such letters with him. She assumed it was a he based on his penmanship these past few moons. This particular reply was, by far, the most provocative. She knew what he was implying. What he was suggesting. What he wanted to do. Kill the king. Such thoughts were treason. The darkest of such. Perhaps it had been a mistake to write to respond to that first fateful letter. But she was so lonely. She had no friends here save the Maester, the one who helped her ferry these letters in the first place. Sometimes she wondered who her secret paramour was. She knew he was from the west, from Casterly Rock, but that was all. He was certainly bold enough in his letters to her. Few dared speak ill of the Mad King these days, those who had often lost their tongues or found themselves dipped into wildfire. An awful fate, both of those. She knew Ares would inflict far worse upon her if he ever learned the truth. But surely talking to a stranger was no sin. Her face flushed. It was a sin. The darkest of sins. She didn't care. She wanted to be free. She wanted to be loved. She wanted more than this gilded cage. Steeling herself, she crumpled up a scroll in her fist and flung it into the fireplace, just as she had each and every one that came before. One could not leave even the slightest scrap behind for Ares to find. It smoldered and crackled there under her gaze, burning away. With each passing moment she felt her heart hammer beneath her breast. She watched the flames, making sure every scrap of precious paper burned away to ash, until even that was gone. Only then did she dare breathe. Ares mustn't see. He must never know. If he did, just thinking about it made her shiver. With a soft, shuddering breath, she snatched up her quill and inkwell, alongside a piece of parchment. Quickly. She had to write quickly and send a raven to Casterly Rock while her so-called husband was distracted. He was busy burning someone at the moment. Rayla could hear their screams from here. She didn't want to know who, if only because she knew what always came after. Gritting her teeth, she went to work and began to pen her reply. It might take days, weeks, even months for an answer. But she dared to pray and hope. Curious. Ares tutted softly. Perhaps this was a secret Ares need not know. The Mad King cackled at the smoldering corpse before him, oblivious to the schemes swirling around his head. Ah, wildfire, the sweetest of all fires. His enemies would burn. News of the vicious attack spread across the whole of Westeros. Lords and ladies one and all heard the words. They kept their children close. You will not leave the keep today, Lyanna. But why not, father? No buts. That goes double for your brothers. The surly girl stomped outside, swearing like a sailor under her breath. Rickard Stark, Warden of the North and Lord of Winterfell, bowed his head toward the table and heaved a sigh. She would hate him today, but understand tomorrow. This was for the best. Elia cast a wistful glance to the horizon. Nathaniel mustn't die. He must not. She'd be terribly cross if he did. The answer is no, Robert. You and your brothers will not go outside, not today. This on that, old man. You've kept us in the keep for days. One more word and I'll cuff you. The young lord grit his teeth. Fine, father. Prince Rhaegar attacked the practice dummy with a snarl. If he hit it hard enough, he could forget his father's laughter. He hated being confined to the Red Keep. Loathed it. He wanted to be out there. With the people. He was a dragon. Naruto fell. His mind plummeted through space and time and sky and earth as he slept, falling. He saw many things. Armies marching. Fire. Blood. A raven with 3 eyes flew beside him. There in the sky, blotting out the sun, a swarm of crying dragons. Wake up. The 3-eyed raven intoned. You must wake up. He'd heard that voice before. From the tree. Hadn't he? And then a most pleasant coolness settled over him. It felt like someone had draped a blanket of coolest snow over his skin to soothe his boiling blood. His strength, already on the verge of recovering, rushed back in. He forced himself to focus, drawing on the natural energy in the air. Entering sage mode was second nature to him now, even Maressa while he lay still. His recovery accelerated tenfold and he found the strength to sit up. The boy lives. Golden eyes snapped open. Someone sat at his bedside. He squinted, blinking at her, trying to focus his blurry vision. It was the same faceless woman from before. No, he realized, not a woman but a girl, maybe a year or 2 older than him. His temper sparked. Back to try again, was she? She opened her mouth to speak but he didn't give her the chance. He surged upright, grabbed her by the throat with both hands and slammed her down, all but pinning her to the bed. She didn't resist in the least. When her hands rose, her left was empty, while her right held a small bottle. The now empty vial clattered out of her hand and struck the floor, shattering softly. The girl is unarmed. She gasped, face paling. A girl helped you. He could taste something in his mouth, faintly sweet. Had she forced him to drink whatever was in that vial? Why are you here? To help. She looked at him with her dark eyes. The poison was potent. Most would have perished in less than a day. You slept for a fortnight but did not die. So a girl gave you the antidote. Now a boy has recovered far sooner than he would have alone. His fingers slackened around her throat but he still didn't let her up. Why? His brow furrowed as he sat up. I killed your friend. The boy killed no one. He scoffed. Pretty sure I killed someone. No, she shook her head, as much as his grip would allow. You killed no one. A man who discarded his name. That still doesn't explain why you helped me. She stared at him for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft, nearly reverent. Our God wears many faces. Yours is one of them. Your death made flesh. He reeled back, incredulous. You think I'm a god? The girl saw what a girl saw. She lowered her arms. And a girl saw much. Your eyes changed. You possess power that men do not. Blades shatter on your flesh and in your fists. You slew a man twice your size, crushed his head like a grape. Poison cannot kill you, only make you sleep. If that is not a god, then what is? Slowly, reluctantly he released her. And who are you? She stiffened where she lay. A girl has no name. A girl would be your sword. Your shadow. Your shield. He sensed nothing but honest from her. Honesty and fear. Outright terror, really. Did she think he would hunt her down? Finish the job? No, better than that, with her alive, he'd have a witness. He needed that. More than that, he needed allies. The attack in the nursery had made things abundantly clear. He was strong in this second life, possessing nearly all of his abilities from the last, but he could be taken by surprise. Alone, he could only do so much. But with allies by his side, friends' weapons. He could always kill this one later. If you're going to serve me, you'll need a name. The girl stared up at him and said nothing, she made not a sound. Naruto knew that look. He blew out a sigh and let her sit up. You're going to make me pick out one, aren't you? The tiniest ghost of a smile traced her face as she did so. A girl would not mind. That accent. He could finally place it now. You're Westerosi. From the east. She nodded. A girl lived in Flea Bottom once, when she had a name. The hair on the back of his neck rose. There was something about the way she said those words. Am I looking at your real face right now? She shook her head. You're not. Show me. The faceless girl was silent for an agonizingly long moment. Then, slowly, she reached up to her face with both hands, hooking her fingers behind her ears. As he looked, she peeled it backward, parting it as one might carve an onion. It was a strangely fascinating, horrifying thing to watch. Her face came away and her dark hair with it. Silver blonde tresses tumbled down her back and gray-violet eyes blinked back at him, set within a lean face marred by an ugly scar, cutting leftwise across the length of her brow, before curving down into the bridge of her nose. It was a miracle she hadn't lost an eye. Nevertheless, he knew what she was, if not who. He was looking at a Targaryen bastard. This one was a Blackfire. Not a pure blood, that much was infinitely clear, but someone who had the blood of the dragon in her veins all the same. He could tell by looking at her. Which once more begged the question. Who are you? No one. Stubborn. Let's try again. Who are you? No one. She flinched a little this time. He didn't miss it. I'm going to ask you one more time. His voice dropped a growl. Lie to me again and I'll finish what I started. Who are you? The girl does not know. She flung up her arms in a rare fit of pique, face twisting in distress. A girl never had one. Her hands flailed at him, slapping at his chest. He barely felt it. She was always called it or this, or bitch, or that. No names for her, never names. She never had one. Sympathy tugged at his heart and heart. Pit softened it. You don't even know your name? Another shake of her head. A girl tried to ask once. She was given this. She touched a finger to her face and the pink scar there. She did not ask again. Then he'd give her a name. One sprang to him out the darkness of his mind. Nymeria. How's that sound? Nymeria. The young Blackfire said the word slowly, rolling it over her tongue as though tasting it. A boy has a foul sense of humor. I'm a Lannister. A rusty chuckle stole out of him, despite his best efforts. What did you expect? The girl, she paused, swallowed and took a moment to comport herself. No, I accept this name. She bowed her head and quite suddenly there was a dagger in her hands. My blade is yours. Where she'd gotten it from, he knew not, only that she was now laying it in his lap. I will serve. From this day until my last. Valar Morghulis. Valar Daenerys. He found himself muttering back out of habit, if nothing else. He knew what the words meant. The tiniest smile touched her scarred face. But you are more than a man. Fair. Do you know who hired you to kill me? A girl does not. Clearly she was going to struggle with that terminology a bit. A great amount of money was given. How much? Enough for two. She held up a pair of fingers, forming a V shape with them. And so too were sent. You were to be a girl's test. Her face pinched in pain at the memory. A girl failed. A girl expected to die but you showed mercy. Naruto grimaced. I didn't. He hadn't been thinking straight at the time, he just wanted her gone. Funny how a seemingly inconsequential choice like that came back not to bite him, but to aid him. The girl took your message back to the House of the Undying as demanded. The little Blackfire barreled on. A girl said we were foolish to attack you among other things and was cast out for her words. She is no longer welcome in the House of the Undying, her bravos. Those bright eyes centered on him. It was her home for some time. Now it is no longer. And so a girl came here. No wonder she tied herself to him. The faceless men would be after her now, too. She wished to live. There was no duplicity in her voice, no negative intent he could sense. He found himself patting her head. Well, in that case. The door creaked open across the room. Cersei emerged, carrying a tray of food. He could see and smell. A bowl of soup atop it. Naruto perked. She took one look at him and froze, going still as stone. She didn't even seem to see Nymeria sitting next to him. She only had eyes for him. The tray clattered to the floor, spilling broth everywhere as she covered her mouth. They answered my prayers. Naruto blinked, not quite comprehending. They who? His sister didn't answer, she just jumped him. Dewin actually flinched when Cersei dragged him into his chambers. One had to know him to see it, to know what to look for, but it was there. His father's eyes didn't so much widen as they did bulge, the writing quill in his hand snapping clean in half as his right hand jerked to the side, coincidentally striking the inkwell which spilled and ruined whatever letter he'd been penning. "You're awake." He shook his ink-spattered hand out, recovered quickly, but Naruto didn't miss the rattle in his voice. "You've been asleep for some time." "I gathered that. Where's Jamie?" Cersei made a pained noise. "Hunting with Uncle Kevin." "Your mother is sleeping." Tuin continued before he could think to ask of her. "I'll wake her shortly. How are you?" "Well, oddly enough." Namiria's antidote, coupled with all the natural energy he'd drawn in, had done much to alleviate his aches and pains. "Good. Straight to business then. The future of our family would be determined in coming months, if not years. Do you remember anything of your attackers?" Naruto allowed himself a nod and said what he knew. Namiria stiffened a little at his side. "Do you understand why you were targeted?" Tuin asked. "I have a suspicion. There are precious few in this world who could command enough wealth to hire a faceless man, let alone two at once." Tuin must have given the matter some thought because he didn't object at all when Cersei clung on to his arm. "One would be the Mesters of Old Town. Another would be the Magisters across the Narrow Sea. Lord Varys assures me that while they are terribly interested in you, they do not wish you dead." The blonde brow rose. "And you trust him?" Tuin made a rare noise of approval. "I trust him to act in a certain capacity. The man loathes magic, but he would not act in such a feckless fashion toward one who hasn't threatened him. He is nothing if not honest in that regard. Think then who could command such wealth, who has a grudge against the Lannisters, who would stand to benefit from your death?" He was being led to an answer. "The king." "But why?" "My friendship with Ares," Tuin looked away with a grimace, if you can call it such, "has been deteriorating for some time now. And speaking of dragons." He looked to Nymeria. "I understand we have you to thank for my son's survival." Nymeria shrugged one shoulder. "A boy would have awoken sooner or later. A girl merely expedited his recovery." "You're one of the faceless." "Was?" She scowled. "No longer." Cersei glowered at her. "How easily you turn your coat." Naruto pinched her just above the ribs. Rather than retort, she bowed her head. "Odd, that. Why was she behaving?" "You chose to back the winning side." Tuin's words drew him back to reality. "I can respect that." He looked to him. "And you trust her?" He could feel Nymeria's gaze on him, pleading. It occurred to him that he could have her killed in this moment. She wouldn't be able to do anything about it. Decency won out. She didn't have to come back here. I'd still be in a bed if she hadn't. "Fair," Tuin allowed. "A former faceless girl might be useful." Nymeria bridled. "I serve only one." Tuin took her defiance in stride. "Aid us and I shall see you rewarded beyond your wildest dreams." But back to the matter of Jamie. Once more, Naruto found himself the object of that piercing stare. "There is something you must be made aware of, boy. Much has happened while you were asleep." He couldn't help but gulp at that. "Such as?" Tuin didn't mince words. "Your brother has rescinded his rights to Casterly Rock. He wishes to join Ares' Kingsguard as soon as possible." Cersei gripped his arm tighter. Now Naruto understood the reason for her silence. Her grief. It felt like the floor fell out from under his feet. "You can't be serious." "I am." Tuin met his gaze evenly. "You're now my heir." So this part ends here. Alright, that's it for today's video guys. Let me know in the comments section how was the story, and also don't forget to like, share and subscribe. I will meet you in another video. Bye bye.